Erica Wells thought she'd left her past buried 6 feet under Afghan soil. But when she and her canine partner Bear discovered tiny footprints leading away from her isolated cabin, she had no idea those tracks would lead her straight back to the one person she'd failed to save. The child at the end of that snowy trail clutched something that made Erica's blood run cold. A military ID tag that belonged to someone who died because of her choices. Someone whose ghost had haunted her dreams for 5 or das. Long years. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day, and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The morning started like any other in the remote mountains of Colorado. Erica Wells pushed open the heavy wooden door of her cabin, breathing in the crisp December air that burned her lungs in the most familiar way. Snow had fallen throughout the night, blanketing the world in pristine white that stretched endlessly through the pine forest surrounding her small sanctuary. There, her German Shepherd companion pressed against her leg with the practiced patience of a dog who understood that mornings required careful observation before action. Erica's weathered hands wrapped around her coffee mug as she scanned the tree line, a habit that had kept her alive through 3 tours in Afghanistan and continued to serve her well in civilian isolation. At 3rd of 4, her face carried the kind of lines that spoke of decisions made under pressure, eyes that had seen too much, and a jawline that suggested she rarely backed down from a fight. Her dark hair was pulled back in the same efficient ponytail she'd worn for years, though now silver threads caught the morning light in ways that reminded her time was moving forward whether she was ready or not. Bear's ears perked up suddenly, his massive head tilting toward the western edge of the property. Erica followed his gaze, expecting to see the usual deer or elk that wandered through her land, but instead spotted something that made her stomach tighten with unease. Small footprints, clearly human and far too tiny to belong to any adult, led away from her cabin in a straight line toward the dense forest beyond. "What the hell?" she muttered, setting down her coffee with enough force to slosh the dark liquid onto her porch boards. The prints were fresh, made sometime during the night while she'd been sleeping, and they belonged to someone small enough to be a child. Out here, 20 miles from the nearest town, and accessible only by a dirt road that most GPS systems couldn't find, children didn't just wander by in the middle of winter. Bear was already moving, his nose pressed to the ground as he followed the scent trail with the focused intensity that had made him invaluable during their military service together. Erica grabbed her winter coat and boots, her mind racing through possibilities that all felt wrong. Lost hikers didn't bring children into these mountains during winter. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away through terrain that would challenge experienced outdoorsmen, let alone a kid. The tracks were perfectly preserved in the snow, small sneakers with a distinctive tread pattern that suggested someone around 8 or 9 years old. They moved with purpose, rather than the wandering pattern of someone lost, heading directly toward the old hunting trail that wound deeper into the wilderness. Erica's training kicked in automatically, her eyes cataloging details that might matter later. The depth of the prints suggesting the child wasn't carrying much weight, the steady pace indicating they weren't panicked or struggling through the snow. "Stay close, Bear," she commanded, though the dog needed no such instruction. He'd already positioned himself slightly ahead, and to her right, following the scent while keeping himself between Erica and whatever dangers the forest might hold. Their partnership had been forged in combat zones, where trusting each other meant the difference between coming home and coming home in a box, and that bond had only strengthened during their 5 years of civilian life. The forest closed around them as they followed the trail deeper into the mountains, towering pines creating a cathedral of shadows and filtered sunlight that painted the snow in shades of blue and gold. Erica's breath formed clouds in the cold air as she maintained a steady pace, her body remembering the rhythm of patrol, even as her mind wrestled with questions that had no good answers. Who was this child, and how had they gotten so close to her cabin without triggering any of the security measures she'd installed after moving here? The footprints continued for nearly half a mile, winding through trees and over fallen logs with the kind of confident navigation that suggested the child knew exactly where they were going. Bear's behavior grew more alert as they progressed, his tail straight and ears forward in the stance that meant he'd identified something significant ahead. Erica's hand moved instinctively to the pistol holstered at her hip, a habit that civilian life hadn't managed to break despite years of therapy and well-meaning advice from VA counselors. They crested a small rise, and the trail led down into a natural clearing where the morning sun had melted some of the snow into muddy patches around exposed rocks and fallen trees. At the far end of the clearing, perhaps 50 yards away, a small figure sat on a moss-covered boulder with their back to the approaching pair. The child appeared to be wearing a thin jacket, completely inadequate for the mountain winter. Dark hair falling around their shoulders as they hunched forward over something in their hands. Erica's throat tightened as she recognized the posture of someone lost in grief, the way shoulders curved inward when the weight of sorrow became too much to carry upright. She'd sat that same way countless times over the past 5 years, usually on her own porch in the early morning hours when sleep became impossible and the ghosts of her failures demanded attention. Bear whined softly, sensing the emotional charge in the air with the sensitivity that made him such an effective therapy dog during their sessions at the local VA hospital. "Hey there," Erica called out gently, stopping about 20 feet away to avoid startling the child. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" The small figure turned slowly, revealing the face of a girl who couldn't have been more than 9 years old, with large dark eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Her skin was pale from cold, and her lips had taken on a bluish tint that spoke of exposure. But what made Erica's blood freeze wasn't the child's condition. It was what she held clutched in her small hands, like a lifeline. Military dog tags, the metal chain glinting in the filtered sunlight as it caught between tiny fingers that trembled from more than just the cold. The tags were scratched and worn, the kind of weathering that came from years of wear in harsh conditions. And even from a distance, Erica could see they weren't new. Her stomach lurched as possibilities crashed through her mind, each one worse than the last. "Where did you get those?" she asked, her voice coming out rougher than intended. The girl's eyes widened with something that might have been recognition, though that was impossible. Erica was certain she'd never seen this child before, would have remembered those eyes that seemed to hold depths no 9-year-old should possess. "Are you Erica Wells?" the girl asked, her voice small but steady despite the chattering of her teeth. "Sergeant Erica Wells from the 75th Ranger Regiment?" The question hit Erica like a physical blow, sending her back 5 years to sandy mountains and blast-scorched valleys where she'd worn those exact stripes on her uniform. Nobody in her civilian life knew her military rank or unit designation. She'd been careful to keep those details buried along with everything else she'd left behind when she mustered out and disappeared into the Colorado wilderness to lick her wounds in private. "How do you know that name?" Erica whispered, taking a step closer despite every instinct screaming at her to maintain distance. Bear pressed against her leg, offering silent support as he sensed her distress, his warm bulk a grounding presence in a moment that felt like reality was shifting beneath her feet. The girl held up the dog tags, letting them catch the light as they spun slowly on their chain. "These belong to my sister, Corporal Maria Santos, Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion." The name exploded through Erica's consciousness like an IED detonation, bringing with it a cascade of memories she'd spent 5 years trying to bury. Maria Santos, 22 years old, bright smile that could light up the darkest forward operating base, the kind of soldier who volunteered for every dangerous mission because she believed in making a difference. Maria Santos, who died because Erica made the wrong call during a convoy operation outside Kandahar, who'd bled out in the back of a Humvee while Erica held her hand and promised everything would be okay. "That's impossible," Erica breathed. Though even as she spoke the words, she could see Maria's features reflected in the child's face, the same stubborn chin and expressive eyes, the same way of tilting her head when asking difficult questions. "Maria never mentioned having a sister." "She talked about you, though," the girl continued, sliding down from the boulder to stand in the snow that came nearly to her knees. "Before she deployed the last time, she showed me letters you'd written. She said you were the best sergeant she'd ever served under, that you cared about your soldiers like they were family." Each word was a knife twist in old wounds that had never properly healed. Erica remembered writing those letters, remembered trying to maintain morale and connection with her unit during the long months of deployment. She remembered Maria's enthusiasm for the mission, her belief that they were making a real difference in the world, and how that belief had died along with her on a dusty road that Erica should have secured better, should have approached differently. should have protected with her own life if necessary. "What's your name?" Erica managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper as she struggled to process what was happening. The girl couldn't be more than 9, which meant she would have been only 4 when Maria died. How much could a 4-year-old really remember about a sister who'd been deployed for most of that time? "Isabella Santos," the girl replied, straightening her shoulders in a gesture so reminiscent of her sister that Erica had to blink back sudden tears. "My mom called me Izzy. Maria used to call me her little shadow because I followed her everywhere when she was home on leave." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. Maria had been supporting her family financially, sending most of her combat pay home to help with expenses that she'd never detailed, but that Erica now understood included caring for a much younger sister. The grief in Maria's voice, when she'd talked about missing important moments at home, the way she'd clutched photographs during quiet moments in the barracks, it all made sense now, in ways that made Erica's chest ache with cock. Fresh guilt. "Where's your mother, Izzy?" Erica asked, looking around the clearing as if expecting another adult to emerge from the trees. "How did you get out here? This place is miles from anywhere." Izzy's small face crumpled slightly before she pulled herself together again, displaying the kind of emotional control that no child should need to master. "Mom died last year. Cancer. She was sick for a long time after Maria, after what happened. The people from the state, they wanted to put me in a home, but I ran away." "You ran away from social services?" Erica felt her protective instincts surge. The same fierce loyalty that had made her such an effective leader in combat, now focusing entirely on this small girl who somehow found her way through the wilderness to deliver a message that was reshaping everything Erica thought she knew about her past. "Izzy, you could have died out here. It's 20 degrees and you're wearing a spring jacket." "I wasn't going to die," Izzy replied with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. "Maria told me you lived up here. Before she deployed the last time, she made me memorize your address in case something happened to her and Mom. She said if things ever got really bad, I should find you, because you were the kind of person who kept promises." The weight of responsibility settled on Erica's shoulders like a familiar pack, heavy, but not unwelcome. She'd spent 5 years running from the guilt of Maria's death, hiding in isolation while telling herself she was protecting the world from her failures. But here was Maria's sister, alone and vulnerable, carrying dog tags like a talisman, and looking at Erica with eyes that held both desperate hope and the kind of resigned sadness that came from losing everyone who mattered. "Come on," Erica said, shrugging out of her heavy winter coat and wrapping it around Izzy's small frame. The girl disappeared into the oversized garment, but stopped shivering immediately as the retained body heat enveloped her. "Let's get you back to the cabin where it's warm. We need to get some food in you and figure out what happens next." Bear had been sitting patiently through their conversation, but now moved to Izzy's side and gently pressed his massive head against her arm. The girl's face lit up with the first genuine smile Erica had seen from her, small hands reaching out to bury themselves in the dog's thick fur. Bear's tail wagged slowly as he accepted the attention, his gentle nature asserting itself in the presence of someone who clearly needed comfort more than protection. "He's beautiful," Izzy whispered, her voice full of wonder, as Bear leaned into her touch. "Maria said you had a dog, but I didn't know he'd be so big." "He's a good boy," Erica agreed, watching the interaction with something that might have been the first stirring of hope she'd felt in years. "His name is Bear, and he's very good at taking care of people who need help." The walk back to the cabin passed mostly in silence, with Izzy staying close to Bear, while Erica's mind raced through the implications of what had just happened. She'd been found, tracked down by a 9-year-old girl who'd somehow navigated the social services system, survived on her own long enough to research Erica's location, and then walked through miles of winter forest to deliver a message that was 5 years overdue. Back at the cabin, Erica got Izzy settled in front of the fireplace with hot chocolate and thick wool socks, while Bear maintained his self-appointed position as guardian and comfort provider. The girl looked even smaller inside the warm space, dwarfed by furniture built for adults, and surrounded by the Spartan decor of someone who'd been living alone for too long. Erica's home reflected her military background, an isolated lifestyle, functional but cold, lacking the personal touches that made a space feel welcoming to a child. "Tell me about your mom," Erica said gently, settling into the chair across from Izzy with her own mug of coffee. "What was she like?" Izzy's face softened as she considered the question, small hands wrapped around her mug for warmth and comfort. "She was really pretty, and she used to sing when she cooked dinner. Spanish songs that her grandmother taught her. After Maria died, she stopped singing for a while, but then she started again because she said Maria wouldn't want us to be sad forever." The casual way Izzy spoke about death and loss broke something loose in Erica's chest, a knot of grief and guilt that had been wound tight for 5 years. This child had experienced more loss than most adults, yet she carried it with a dignity that spoke to strength inherited from both her mother and sister. Maria would have been proud of the person her little shadow was becoming, even under circumstances that no family should have to endure. "The cancer came back when I was 7, Izzy continued, staring into the fire as if the flames held memories only she could see. "Mom tried to hide it at first, but I could tell she was getting sick again. She was tired all the time and didn't eat much, and sometimes I heard her crying at night when she thought I was asleep." Erica's throat tightened as she imagined a 7-year-old child watching her mother slowly die while trying to be brave and helpful. The injustice of it all, losing Maria in combat and then her mother to illness, leaving Izzy completely alone in the world, felt like a cosmic cruelty that no amount of faith or philosophy could adequately explain. "She talked about Maria a lot during the last few months," Izzy said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She kept Maria's room exactly the way it was when she left for deployment, with all her pictures and medals and the letters you sent. Sometimes I'd find Mom sitting on Maria's bed, holding these dog tags and crying." Izzy pulled the chain from around her neck, letting the metal tags rest in her palm as she studied them with the reverence of someone handling a religious artifact. "The night before Mom died, she gave these to me and made me promise to find you someday. She said Maria always talked about how you took care of your soldiers, how you never left anyone behind, and that if something happened to both of them, you'd take care of me too." The promise hit Erica like a physical force, the kind of battlefield oath that bound soldiers together across time and distance. She'd never made such a promise to Maria or her mother, but she understood the logic behind it. In military culture, taking care of your people extended beyond active duty, beyond death, beyond the formal structures that governed official relationships. It was about honor and loyalty and the unbreakable bonds forged in shared danger. "I've been in foster care for 8 months, Izzy continued, her voice taking on a flat quality that suggested she'd learned to protect herself by not feeling too deeply about her circumstances. 3 different homes. The first family was okay, but they already had 4 kids and didn't really have room for another one. The second family was nice, but they wanted me to forget about Maria and Mom, to start fresh and not talk about them anymore." Erica's hands clenched into fists as she imagined well-meaning adults trying to erase the most important relationships in this child's life. She'd encountered similar attitudes during her own therapy sessions, counselors who suggested she move on from her military experiences and focus on building a civilian identity. The advice was probably sound from a psychological standpoint, but it ignored the reality that some bonds transcended life and death, that carrying the memory of fallen comrades was both burden and privilege. The third family. Izzy's voice grew even quieter. "The dad was mean when he drank, and the mom pretended not to notice. I stayed there for 2 months before I decided I'd rather take my chances on my own." "So you ran away," Erica said, though it wasn't really a question. She could see the logic from a 9-year-old's perspective, the calculation that unknown dangers might be preferable to known ones, especially when you were carrying the hope that somewhere in the world was a person who'd cared enough about your sister to write letters and share stories. "I had some money saved from birthdays and Christmas, and I remembered the address Maria made me memorize. It took me 3 days to get here, riding buses and walking, sleeping in a truck stop the first night, and in the woods last night. I wasn't sure I had the right place until I saw you this morning." The casual way Izzy described her dangerous journey made Erica's chest tight with a mixture of admiration and horror. This child had displayed more courage and resourcefulness than many trained soldiers, navigating the adult world alone while carrying nothing but faith in a promise that no one had actually made. She'd gambled everything on the hope that Maria's sergeant would honor an obligation that existed only in the wishful thinking of a dying mother. "You could have been hurt," Erica said, though she recognized the futility of explaining dangers that Izzy had already survived. "There are bad people who prey on children traveling alone, whether that can kill you in hours, wild animals that see small humans as potential prey." "I know," Izzy replied simply. "But staying where I was felt more dangerous than leaving. At least out here, if something bad happened, it would be because I chose to take the risk, instead of having it chosen for me." The wisdom in that statement stopped Erica cold. At 9 years old, Izzy had already learned lessons about agency and self-determination that most adults never fully grasped. She'd recognized that sometimes the unknown was preferable to the unacceptable, that taking control of your own fate was worth risking everything, even when the odds were stacked against you. Bear had been lying quietly at Izzy's feet throughout their conversation, but now he stood and padded over to Erica's chair, pressing his head against her knee in the way that meant he was offering comfort and support. The dog had been through his own trauma during their military service, had learned to read emotional distress in humans with uncanny accuracy, and his intervention now suggested he recognized that Erica was approaching some kind of breaking point. "I need to make some phone calls," Erica said finally, her voice rough with emotions she'd kept locked away for too long. "Social services will be looking for you, and there are legal procedures that have to be followed. But I want you to know, Izzy, that I'm not going to let you go back to a situation where you feel unsafe or unwanted." Izzy's eyes filled with tears for the first time since Erica had found her in the clearing, the careful composure finally cracking under the weight of hope and relief. "Does that mean I can stay here? With you and Bear?" The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could fully comprehend. Erica had spent 5 years in isolation, convinced that her failures in combat had disqualified her from protecting anyone ever again. She'd built a life around solitude and self-punishment, surrounding herself with enough wilderness to ensure that her mistakes could never again result in someone else's death. But looking at Izzy now, seeing Maria's eyes and stubborn chin in a face that radiated hope despite everything she'd endured, Erica realized that isolation might have been another form of failure. Running away from responsibility and connection hadn't honored Maria's memory or served any greater good. It had simply been an elaborate form of self-pity, a way of avoiding the hard work of healing and moving forward. "Yeah," Erica said, her voice gaining strength as she made the decision that felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "Yeah, you can stay here. We'll figure out the legal stuff, but this is your home now if you want it to be." Izzy launched herself from her chair into Erica's arms, small body trembling with exhaustion and relief as she finally allowed herself to believe that her journey had ended safely. Erica held her tightly, breathing in the scent of childhood and snow and the kind of trust that came from having nowhere else to turn. Bear pressed against both of them, completing a circle of connection that felt like the first healthy thing Erica had experienced in years. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and difficult conversations. Erica contacted social services to report that she'd found Izzy and was providing temporary care, then spent an hour on hold before speaking with a caseworker who seemed genuinely relieved that the missing child was safe. The bureaucratic machinery of child welfare was complex and slow-moving, but Erica's military background and stable living situation worked in her favor, especially when it became clear that Izzy had sought her out specifically and was thriving in her care. While Erica navigated the administrative maze, Izzy explored the cabin with Bear as her devoted guide. The girl examined everything with the curiosity of someone discovering a new world, running her fingers along the spines of Erica's military history books, studying the few photographs on display, and asking thoughtful questions about the various pieces of equipment that reflected their owner's background and interests. "This is Maria's," Izzy said suddenly, stopping in front of a shadow box mounted on the living room wall. Inside was a purple heart medal that Erica had never mentioned, displayed alongside a photograph of Maria in full combat gear, smiling broadly despite the harsh desert backdrop. Erica's throat tightened as she looked at the display she put together during her first year of civilian life. back when she'd still believed that honoring fallen comrades might somehow ease the weight of survivors' guilt. She'd included medals from several soldiers in her unit who hadn't made it home, creating a memorial that was both tribute and daily reminder of her failures as a leader. "She earned that medal when our convoy hit an IED," Erica said quietly, joining Izzy in front of the display. "She was injured pretty badly, but she kept fighting to protect the rest of us until the medics could get there. Your sister was one of the bravest soldiers I ever served with. Tell me about that day," Izzy requested, settling into the nearby chair with the patience of someone accustomed to adult conversations. "Mom never wanted to hear the details, but I need to know what happened to her." Erica hesitated, looking down at this child who'd already endured more loss than anyone should have to carry. The details of Maria's death weren't suitable for a 9-year-old, but Izzy deserved to know something about how her sister had lived and died, deserved to understand that Maria's service had meaning beyond the tragic way a cough ended. "We were escorting a supply convoy through a valley that intelligence said was secure," Erica began, choosing her words carefully. "Maria was driving the lead vehicle, which was the most dangerous position, but also the most important one. She volunteered for it because she wanted to make sure everyone else stayed safe." The memory unfolded in Erica's mind with the clarity that trauma often provided, every detail preserved in sharp focus despite the years that had passed. She could still smell the dust and diesel fuel, still feel the weight of her gear, and the constant tension that came with operating in hostile territory. Maria had been singing that morning, some pop song that drove everyone crazy with its repetitive chorus, but that now existed in Erica's memory as the soundtrack to her last conversation with the young soldier. "The explosion happened so fast that there wasn't time to react," Erica continued, editing out the chaos and terror that had followed the blast. "Maria was hurt, but she kept her team together and helped coordinate our response until the helicopters arrived. She saved lives that day, Izzy. Her actions meant that other soldiers made it home to their families." It was true, as far as it went, but it left out the part where Erica had made the tactical decision that put them in that valley. The intelligence failure that had resulted in driving straight into an ambush, the 20 minutes of hell that had ended with 3 dead and 7 wounded. It left out Maria's final words, her request that Erica write to her family, her fear that she'd never see her little sister grow up. "Did she suffer?" Izzy asked with the directness that children brought to difficult subjects. At the end, was she in pain? Erica met her eyes and lied with the kind of mercy that sometimes demanded dishonesty. "No, sweetheart. She wasn't in pain. She was thinking about you and your mom, talking about how proud she was of her little shadow and how much she loved you both." That part was true, at least. Maria's last coherent words had been about her family, about the life she was leaving behind and the people who would have to continue without her. She'd made Erica promise to write to her mother, to explain that Maria had died doing work that mattered, serving with people who cared about her and would remember her sacrifice. Erica had kept that promise, sending a letter that had taken her weeks to write and that had probably provided little comfort to a grieving mother. She'd tried to capture Maria's spirit and dedication, her jokes and kindness, and the way she'd made everyone around her feel a little braver. She'd never heard back from Mrs. Santos, never knew if the letter had arrived or been read, never suspected that it would someday lead her daughter to an isolated cabin in the Colorado mountains. "I'm glad she wasn't alone," Izzy said finally, her voice thoughtful as she processed what she'd learned. Maria hated being alone. When she was home on leave, she'd follow me around the house and ask a million questions about school and friends and what I'd been doing while she was gone. The picture Izzy painted of her sister was different from the one Erica remembered, more personal and domestic, focused on relationships rather than duty. It was a reminder that every soldier was someone's family member first, that the people they served with saw only one dimension of their full human experience. Maria the sister had probably been different from Maria the soldier, just as Erica the guardian would need to be different from Erica the sergeant. The legal process of becoming Izzy's guardian took several months to navigate, involving background checks and home inspections and meetings with social workers who seemed genuinely invested in finding the best outcome for a child who'd already endured more disruption than anyone should have to handle. Erica threw herself into the process with the same methodical thoroughness she'd once applied to military operations, researching regulations and requirements until she understood every aspect of what would be expected of her. During those months, Izzy settled into life at the cabin with the adaptability that children possessed, transforming spaces and routines simply by being present. She helped with daily chores, learned to split kindling and stack firewood, discovered that she had a natural affinity for working with Bear on his therapy dog training exercises. The spare bedroom that had served as storage became a child's room, painted in colors that Izzy chose, and decorated with photographs of her mother and sister alongside new memories she was creating with Erica and Bear. The change in the cabin's atmosphere was dramatic and healing. Where once there had been silence and solitude, now there was conversation and laughter, the sound of a child's voice asking endless questions about the world around her. Izzy's presence forced Erica to engage with life again, to see her mountain sanctuary through the eyes of someone discovering it for the first time, to remember that isolation was a choice rather than a permanent condition. "Why did you come up here by yourself?" Izzy asked one evening as they sat by the fire, Bear sprawled across both their feet like a living blanket. "After Maria died, why didn't you stay with the other soldiers?" It was a fair question, and one that Erica had been asking herself as she watched Izzy thrive in an environment that many adults would find challenging. The child had adapted to mountain life with enthusiasm, learning to read weather patterns and animal tracks, developing the kind of outdoor skills that took most people years to acquire. She seemed to find peace in the wilderness that had taken Erica much longer to achieve. "I felt responsible for what happened to Maria and the others," Erica admitted, finding that talking about her past was becoming easier with practice. "I was their leader, and I made decisions that got people hurt. I thought if I stayed away from everyone else, I couldn't make any more mistakes that would hurt people I cared about." "But you were already taking care of people," Izzy pointed out with the logic that children brought to adult problems. "Maria told me about how you wrote letters to soldiers' families, how you visited people in the hospital, how you made sure everyone felt important and valued. She said you were the kind of leader who made people want to be better than they thought they could be." The perspective was jarring because it highlighted something Erica had lost sight of during her years of self-imposed exile. She'd focused so intensely on her failures that she'd forgotten her successes, the soldiers who'd come home because of her decisions, the families who'd been spared the knock on the door that changed everything. Maria's death had been a tragedy, but it hadn't erased the positive impact Erica had made during her years of service. "Sometimes," Erica said carefully, "when something really bad happens, it's easier to focus on what went wrong than to remember what went right. I spent so much time thinking about the people I couldn't save that I forgot about the ones I could. Like me." "Like me," Izzy said simply, snuggling closer to Bear as the fire crackled in the hearth. "You saved me, even though you didn't know I needed saving. Maria was right about you keeping promises, even the ones nobody asked you to make." The observation hit Erica with unexpected force, reframing her relationship with Izzy in terms of choice rather than obligation. She hadn't taken the girl in because she owed something to Maria's memory, though that had certainly been part of her motivation. She'd done it because it was the right thing to do, because someone vulnerable had needed help, and she'd been in a position to provide it. The decision had been about moving toward connection rather than away from isolation, about choosing to engage with life rather than hiding from it. Winter deepened around the cabin as Erica and Izzy established routines and traditions that began to feel like family. They read together in the evenings, worked on Izzy's correspondence schoolwork during the day, and took long walks with Bear through the forest that was becoming as familiar to the girl as her childhood neighborhood had once been. Izzy learned to identify animal tracks and bird calls, to predict weather changes, and navigate by landmarks, skills that connected her to the land in ways that would serve her well, regardless of what the future held. The transformation in Erica was equally dramatic, though more subtle in its manifestations. She began sleeping better, eating more regularly, taking interest in news and events beyond her immediate surroundings. The hypervigilance that had characterized her first years of civilian life gradually gave way to a more relaxed awareness, the kind of alert calm that came from having someone to protect rather than simply threats to avoid. "I want to learn to shoot," Izzy announced one morning, as they worked together to repair a section of fence that had been damaged by a fallen tree. Maria knew how to shoot, and Mom said it was important for women to be able to protect themselves. Erica paused in her work, considering the request with the seriousness it deserved. Firearms training for children was a complex issue that involved legal, practical, and philosophical considerations. But it was also a reality of life in rural areas, where law enforcement might be hours away and dangerous wildlife was a constant presence. More importantly, it was a connection to Maria's memory that Izzy was asking to explore, a way of honoring her sister's military service by developing similar skills. "Okay," Erica said finally. "But we're going to do it right. Safety training first, then basic marksmanship. Then advanced techniques only after you've proven you can handle the responsibility. And everything we do follows strict rules that don't get bent or broken for any reason." End quote. Izzy's face lit up with excitement and determination, the same expression Maria had worn when accepting challenging assignments or learning new skills. The resemblance was sometimes painful, but increasingly comforting, a reminder that the best parts of her sister lived on in this child who carried so much strength and resilience in such a small package. The shooting lessons became a regular part of their routine, conducted with military precision and attention to detail that ensured safety remained the top priority. Izzy proved to be a natural marksman, with excellent hand-eye coordination, and the kind of patient focus that separated good shooters from mediocre ones. More importantly, she approached the training with appropriate seriousness, understanding that firearms were tools that demanded respect and careful handling. "Maria would be proud of how you're learning," Erica said one afternoon as they cleaned their weapons after a practice session. She struggled with marksmanship when she first joined the Army, but she worked harder than anyone else until she qualified as an expert. She used to say that being able to protect your people was the most important skill a soldier could develop. Spring arrived gradually in the mountains, bringing with it changes that extended far beyond the melting snow and emerging wildflowers. Izzy had been living with Erica for 6 months, and the legal process of formal adoption was nearing completion. What had begun as emergency guardianship was evolving into something permanent and official, a recognition that their bond had grown beyond obligation into genuine family. The cabin that had once felt too large for one person now seemed perfectly sized for their small family unit. There had appointed himself Izzy's primary guardian and companion, following her on adventures through the forest, and serving as both protector and confidant during moments when the weight of her losses became too heavy to carry alone. The dog's therapeutic training made him uniquely qualified to sense emotional distress and provide comfort, skills he used instinctively with both his human companions. "I had a dream about Maria last night," Izzy said one morning, as they worked together in the garden they'd planted behind the cabin. She was wearing her uniform, but she looked happy instead of serious like in the photographs. "She told me she was glad I found you, and that she wasn't worried about me anymore because she knew I was exactly where I belonged." Erica's hands stilled in the soil as she processed what Izzy had shared. The child rarely spoke about dreams or emotional experiences that might be considered too mature for her age, but when she did, her insights often carried wisdom that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her 9 years of life experience. Whether the dream represented genuine spiritual contact or simply her subconscious mind working through grief and adjustment, it spoke to a healing that was taking place on levels deeper than conscious awareness. "Dreams about people we've lost can be really powerful," Erica replied carefully, not wanting to dismiss Izzy's experience, but also not wanting to encourage beliefs that might become unhealthy obsessions. "Sometimes they help us work through feelings we haven't found words for yet, or they remind us of things we need to remember about the people who were important to us." "Do you ever dream about her?" Izzy asked, settling back on her heels to study Erica with the direct gaze that always suggested deeper currents beneath her questions. "About Maria or the other soldiers who died?" The question touched on territory that Erica had been navigating carefully throughout their months together, the balance between honesty and age-appropriateness when discussing trauma and loss. She'd learned that Izzy could handle more complex emotional conversations than most children her age, but she still needed to be protected from details that might cause nightmares or excessive worry about dangers. beyond her control. "Yes, I do," Erica admitted, wiping dirt from her hands as she considered how much to share. "Sometimes they're difficult dreams about the day she died, but more often they're good memories of times when we were just soldiers working together, laughing about something stupid or complaining about the food or planning what we'd do when we got home." End quote. "Those sound like better dreams," Izzy observed with the practical wisdom that characterized most of her responses to adult problems. "The sad ones probably hurt too much to be helpful, but the happy ones remind you why she was worth missing." The insight was so mature and emotionally sophisticated that Erica felt a familiar surge of protectiveness, mixed with pride. This child had been forced to develop coping mechanisms and philosophical perspectives that most adults never achieved, yet she'd managed to retain optimism and curiosity about the world around her. She was becoming someone remarkable, shaped by loss, but not defined by it, strengthened by adversity, without becoming hardened or cynical. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching on the dirt road that led to their property, an unusual occurrence that immediately put both Erica and Bear on alert. Visitors were rare at their remote location, and unannounced arrivals typically meant either official business or emergency situations that required immediate attention. Erica stood and moved to position herself between Izzy and the approaching sound, her hand instinctively checking for the pistol she wore whenever they were outside the cabin. A government sedan emerged from the tree line, moving slowly over the rough road with the careful precision of someone unfamiliar with mountain driving. The vehicle bore official plates that suggested federal rather than local authorities, though Erica couldn't identify the specific agency from their current distance. She felt Izzy move closer to her side, while Bear positioned himself slightly forward, his body language alert, but not aggressive, as he assessed the potential threat level of their unexpected visitors. The sedan came to a stop near the cabin's front porch, and two people emerged from the vehicle with the measured movements of individuals accustomed to potentially volatile situations. The first was a woman in her 40s, wearing a business suit that seemed incongruous with the wilderness setting, her posture suggesting law enforcement or social services background. The second was a man in military dress uniform, his bearing and decorations indicating senior officer rank, though Erica couldn't make out specific details from their current position. "Stay close to me," Erica murmured to Izzy, her protective instincts fully engaged as she tried to calculate what official business might bring federal agents to their isolated home. The adoption proceedings were progressing smoothly through state channels, and she couldn't think of any federal issues that would require personal visits from uniformed officials. "Ms. Wells," the woman called out as they approached, her voice carrying the professional courtesy that government employees used when delivering information that might be well received or devastating depending on circumstances beyond their control. "I'm Sarah Mitchell from the Department of Veterans Affairs, and this is Colonel James Harrison from the Army's Casualty Notification Office. We'd like to speak with you about some developments regarding your former unit, and specifically about Corporal Maria Santos." The mention of Maria's name sent a chill through Erica's system, bringing with it a flood of possibilities that ranged from bureaucratic updates to revelations that could reshape everything she thought she knew about her soldiers. Deaf. Beside her, Izzy had gone very still, her small hand finding Erica's and gripping tight as she recognized that whatever these officials had come to discuss would likely affect both their lives in significant ways. "What kind of developments?" Erica asked, her voice taking on the crisp tone she'd used when dealing with military bureaucracy during her active duty years. "Is this about benefits or medical records, or is there something else I need to know?" Colonel Harrison stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral in the way that senior officers learned when delivering information that carried emotional weight. "Ms. Wells, we've recently declassified certain intelligence reports related to the convoy operation that resulted in Corporal Santos's death. What we've learned changes our understanding of what happened that day, and we believe you have a right to know the full circumstances." The words hit Erica like a physical blow, threatening to destabilize the peace and healing she'd built over the past months with Izzy. She'd accepted responsibility for the tactical decisions that led to the ambush, had carried the guilt of Maria's death as a burden that defined her post-military identity. The suggestion that new information might alter that narrative was both terrifying and potentially liberating, depending on what revelations the officials had brought to her mountain sanctuary. "I think we should continue this conversation inside," Erica said, glancing down at Izzy, whose face had gone pale with the kind of anxiety that came from adults discussing serious matters in vague terms that left too much room for imagination. "Izzy, why don't you take Bear and get him some fresh water while I talk with these people? We'll fill you in on anything important when we're done." Izzy nodded with the obedience of a child who'd learned to trust adult judgment in crisis situations, but her eyes held questions and concerns that would need to be addressed once Erica understood what information the officials had brought. She walked toward the cabin with Bear at her side, the dog's protective instincts keeping him close to his primary charge while maintaining awareness of the adult conversation that was about to unfold. Inside the cabin, the officials accepted offers of coffee with the gratitude of people who'd driven considerable distances to deliver information that couldn't be communicated through normal channels. Colonel Harrison spread several file folders on the kitchen table, while Sarah Mitchell set up a portable recording device, their movements suggesting that whatever they were about to discuss would require detailed documentation and official records. "Before we begin," Colonel Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who delivered difficult news to military families many times over the course of his career, "I want you to know that what we're about to share doesn't diminish Corporal Santos's service or sacrifice in any way. She died serving her country with honor, and that fundamental truth remains unchanged, regardless of the additional context we can now provide." The preamble suggested that whatever revelations were coming would be significant enough to potentially alter Erica's understanding of events she'd replayed in her mind thousands of times over the past 5 years. She forced herself to remain calm and receptive, drawing on the emotional discipline that had served her during military briefings where the information being shared would directly impact life and death decisions. "The intelligence that cleared your convoy route was deliberately falsified," Sarah Mitchell said without preamble, her direct approach suggesting she'd learned that prolonged buildup often made difficult information harder to process. "We now know that the Taliban had been feeding false information to one of our intelligence assets for several months, specifically targeting convoy operations in that sector." The revelation reframed everything Erica thought she knew about the ambush that had claimed Maria's life. What she'd believed was an intelligence failure resulting from inadequate reconnaissance or analysis had actually been enemy operation designed to lure American forces into carefully prepared kill zones. The tactical decisions she'd blamed herself for making had been based on information that was not just incorrect, intentionally deceptive. The ambush site was prepared weeks in advance. Colonel Harrison continued, opening one of the file folders to reveal satellite photographs and tactical diagrams that showed the sophisticated nature of the enemy's preparations. Multiple escape routes, overlapping fields of fire, buried explosives positioned to channel your vehicles into predetermined locations. This wasn't an opportunistic attack, Ms. Wells. It was a carefully orchestrated trap that would have been difficult for any unit to survive intact. Erica studied the diagrams with the tactical eye that had served her during years of combat operations, recognizing the professional competence of the enemy planning that had resulted in the deaths of her soldiers. The ambush had been designed by someone with extensive knowledge of American convoy procedures and military tactics, suggesting either a former Afghan military officer or foreign advisors with sophisticated training and equipment. Corporal Santos's actions during the engagement were even more heroic than we initially understood, Sarah Mitchell added, producing additional documents that detailed the sequence of events during the 20-minute firefight that had followed the initial explosion. Radio intercepts that we've only recently been able to decrypt show that her return fire prevented the enemy from overrunning your position, buying time for air support to arrive and extract the wounded. The information was reshaping Erica's understanding of Maria's final moments, transforming what she'd remembered as chaos and confusion into a clearer picture of coordinated defensive action that had saved lives. Maria hadn't just been a casualty of poor planning and bad intelligence. She'd been a hero whose actions under fire had prevented a complete disaster that could have resulted in the loss of the entire convoy. "Why are you telling me this now?" Erica asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. This information has been declassified for 5 years. What changed that made it possible to share these details? Colonel Harrison's expression grew more formal as he entered territory that touched on national security considerations and political sensitivities that extended far beyond the individual tragedy of Maria's death. The intelligence asset who provided the false information has been identified and neutralized. Several other operations that were compromised by his reporting have been reviewed, and the decision was made to provide accurate information to the families and unit commanders who were affected by his betrayal. The clinical language couldn't hide the reality that someone had been executed for treason, that the web of deception that had led to Maria's death had been untangled through methods that probably wouldn't bear close scrutiny by humanitarian organizations or civil liberties advocates. Erica understood the necessity of such actions in wartime, but she also recognized that justice achieved through extrajudicial means provided only limited comfort to those who'd been harmed by the original betrayal. "There's something else," Sarah Mitchell said softly, her professional demeanor giving way to something more personal as she opened the final folder on the table. The intelligence reports include details about Corporal Santos's family situation that weren't available to you at the time of her death. She'd been sending most of her combat pay home to support her mother's cancer treatment and her younger sister's care. The revelation that Erica had suspected but never confirmed added another layer of tragedy to Maria's story, highlighting the financial pressures that had motivated her repeated deployments and willingness to accept dangerous assignments. She'd been fighting on 2 fronts, against enemy forces in Afghanistan and against medical bills and economic uncertainty at home, burdens that no 22-year-old should have been carrying alone. Her mother received full survivor benefits, but the family's financial situation remained difficult due to ongoing medical expenses. Colonel Harrison continued, "Mrs. Santos died last year, and her daughter has been in the foster care system since then. We understand that the child has recently come to live with you, which is why we wanted to ensure you had complete information about the circumstances of her sister's death." The officials' knowledge of Izzy's presence in Erica's home suggested that their visit was about more than historical clarification and guilt absolution. They'd come to ensure that Maria's sister was being properly cared for, that the final member of the Santos family was safe and provided for by someone who understood the full context of her losses and the heroic service that had preceded them. "Is there anything else?" Erica asked, sensing that the official briefing was nearing its conclusion, but that additional information might be available if she asked the right questions. "Anything about Maria's service or performance that I should know about?" Sarah Mitchell smiled for the first time since arriving, her expression warming as she opened a smaller folder that contained documents of a different nature than the tactical reports and intelligence summaries they'd been discussing. "Actually, yes. Corporal Santos was posthumously recommended for the Silver Star for her actions during the ambush. The paperwork was delayed due to the classified nature of the intelligence review, but the medal was officially approved last month." The news that Maria would receive recognition for her heroism provided a form of closure that Erica hadn't realized she needed. The Silver Star was a significant honor that would ensure Maria's sacrifice was remembered and celebrated by future generations of soldiers, that her name would be included among the heroes whose actions reflected the best traditions of military service. "The medal will be presented to her family," Colonel Harrison added, looking directly at Erica with an expression that acknowledged her role as Izzy's guardian and protector. "We'd like to arrange a ceremony that honors Corporal Santos appropriately, while being sensitive to her sister's age and emotional needs." The prospect of a formal ceremony brought mixed emotions, pride in Maria's recognition balanced against concern for how such an event might affect Izzy's ongoing process of grief and adjustment. The girl had made remarkable progress in coming to terms with her losses, but official military ceremonies could trigger complex reactions that might require additional support and counseling. "I'll need to discuss it with Izzy," Erica said, already planning how to present the information in ways that emphasized honor and celebration rather than loss and sorrow. "She's been doing well, but she's still processing everything that's happened to her family. Any ceremony would need to be structured in ways that recognize her emotional needs and developmental stage." The officials agreed to coordinate with Erica on the details, recognizing that their primary obligation was to the living family member rather than to military tradition or bureaucratic convenience. They gathered their materials and prepared to leave, their mission accomplished, but their understanding of its impact just beginning to unfold. After they departed, Erica found Izzy and Bear in the girl's bedroom, where she'd been looking through a photo album that contained pictures of her mother and sister during happier times. The child's face showed the strain of waiting for adults to explain developments that would affect her life, the kind of anxiety that came from having experienced too many conversations that had resulted in major changes and disruptions. Was it bad news? Izzy asked without preamble, her directness reflecting both maturity and the need to know where she stood in a world that had already proved unpredictable and sometimes cruel. "Are they going to try to take me away from here?" "No, sweetheart," Erica said quickly, settling beside Izzy on the bed while Bear positioned himself across their feet in his customary protective posture. "Nobody's taking you anywhere. The people who came today brought information about Maria, about what really happened the day she died." Erica explained the officials' revelations in terms that Izzy could understand, emphasizing Maria's heroism and the recognition she would receive while avoiding details about intelligence failures and enemy tactics that might cause nightmares or excessive worry about military service in general. The girl listened with the focused attention she brought to all discussions about her sister, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrated both emotional intelligence and genuine interest in understanding the full story. "So, Maria saved people?" Izzy said when Erica had finished explaining about the Silver Star and the planned ceremony. "Even when she was hurt and scared, she kept fighting to protect the other soldiers?" "Yes," Erica confirmed, feeling tears prick her eyes as she recognized how much this meant to a child who'd been searching for meaning in her sister's death. "She was incredibly brave, and her actions made sure that other families didn't have to go through what you and your mom went through." Izzy was quiet for several minutes, processing the information with the careful consideration she brought to important decisions. Finally, she looked up at Erica with eyes that held new understanding and a kind of peace that hadn't been there before. "I want to go to the ceremony," she said firmly. "I want to be there when they give Maria her medal, and I want everyone to know that she was my sister and that I'm proud of what she did." The determination in Izzy's voice reminded Erica of Maria's own resolve when facing difficult missions or challenging situations. The Santos family had clearly passed down strength and courage through generations, qualities that would serve Izzy well as she continued to navigate a world that had already tested her more than any child should be tested. "Then we'll go," Erica promised, pulling Izzy into a hug that included Bear and became a moment of connection that felt like the completion of a journey that had begun with tiny footprints in the snow. "We'll make sure Maria gets the honor she deserves, and we'll make sure everyone knows about the little sister who loved her enough to walk through a winter forest to find the person who cared about her most." The ceremony took place 6 weeks later at the Regional Veterans Affairs Medical Center, attended by military officials, local veterans organizations, and members of Maria's former unit who'd traveled from across the country to honor their fallen comrade. Izzy wore a dark blue dress that had been her mother's favorite, carrying herself with dignity that impressed everyone who met her, and speaking about her sister with pride that brought tears to the eyes of hardened soldiers. Erica watched from the audience as Izzy accepted Maria's Silver Star on behalf of their family, the small girl dwarfed by the podium but radiating strength that filled the entire auditorium. The medal would join Maria's Purple Heart in the shadow box at their cabin, but more importantly, the ceremony had provided closure and recognition that helped transform grief into celebration of a life well lived and a service that had made a difference. After the ceremony, as they drove back toward the mountains that had become their home, Izzy asked the question that had been building throughout the formal proceedings and official recognition of her sister's heroism. "Do you think Maria would be happy about how things turned out?" she said, watching the landscape change from suburban development to rural wilderness as they climbed toward their cabin. "About me living with you and Bear, about learning to shoot and take care of the land, about becoming the kind of person who doesn't give up when things get hard." Erica considered the question carefully, thinking about the young soldier who'd carried photographs of her little sister through combat zones and who'd spoken constantly about wanting to provide opportunities and security for the family she'd left behind. Maria had enlisted partly to earn money for college, partly to serve her country, but mostly to create a better future for the people she loved. "I think she'd be proud of who you're becoming," Erica said finally, her voice carrying the conviction that came from knowing both sisters well enough to understand their characters and values. "You're strong and brave and kind, just like she was. You don't let difficult circumstances make you bitter or mean. And you care about other people even when you're dealing with your own problems." "Like you do," Izzy observed with the insight that continued to surprise Erica with its accuracy and emotional sophistication. "You were sad and hurt when I found you, but you still took care of me even though you didn't know me, and didn't owe me anything." The parallel hadn't occurred to Erica, but as she considered it, she recognized the truth in Izzy's observation. Both she and the girl had learned to channel their pain into protective action, to find meaning in caring for others even when their own needs remained unmet. It was perhaps the most valuable lesson that military service could teach, that individual suffering became bearable when it served larger purposes and contributed to the welfare of people who mattered. "We take care of each other," Erica said simply, reaching over to squeeze Izzy's hand as their cabin came into view through the trees. "That's what families do. And that's what Maria would want for both of us." Bear was waiting on the porch when they arrived, his tail wagging with the enthusiasm of a dog whose favorite people had returned safely from an adventure that had taken them away for longer than usual. He bounded down the steps to greet them, accepting attention and affection with the dignity of an animal who understood his importance in their small family unit. Inside the cabin, they hung Maria's silver star beside her purple heart, creating a display that honored both her service and sacrifice, while celebrating the ongoing life of the family she'd protected through her actions. The medals caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows, casting small rainbows on the wall that seemed like a blessing on their unconventional household. That evening, as they sat by the fire with Bear sprawled across their feet, Izzy asked one final question about the day's events and their implications for the future they were building together. "Are you happy?" she said, the simplicity of the question belying its significance in the context of everything they'd shared and overcome together. "Living here with me and Bear, being a family even though we didn't start out that way?" Erica looked around the cabin that had been transformed from a refuge for one broken veteran into a home for three beings who'd found healing in their connection to each other. The space felt warm and alive in ways that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth, filled with the kind of contentment that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. "Yes," she said, her voice carrying the certainty that came from recognizing a truth that had taken time to fully understand. "I'm happier than I thought I could be after everything that happened. You and Bear, this place, the life we're building together. It's better than anything I could have planned or imagined." Izzy smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose gamble on trust and hope had paid off beyond her wildest expectations, then settled more comfortably against Erica's side as Bear adjusted his position to accommodate the shifting arrangement of his pack. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside their cabin, three survivors had created something that felt like home, like family, like the kind of future that honored the past while embracing the possibilities that lay ahead. The tiny footprints that had led Erica to discover Izzy in the forest clearing had been the beginning of a journey that neither of them could have anticipated. A path that had taken them through grief and revelation, healing and growth, toward a connection that transcended biology and circumstance. Maria's memory lived on in the love they shared, the strength they drew from each other, and the commitment they'd made to honor her sacrifice by building lives worth the price she'd paid to protect them. As the fire burned low and Izzy dozed against her shoulder, Erica reflected on how completely her understanding of family and responsibility had been transformed by the arrival of a 9-year-old girl carrying dog tags and desperate hope. She'd spent 5 years running from the guilt of survivor syndrome, only to discover that healing came not from isolation, but from connection, not from avoiding responsibility, but from embracing it with wisdom earned through experience and loss. The mountain wilderness that surrounded their cabin would continue to provide sanctuary and peace, but it was no longer a hiding place. It had become a foundation for building something new, a place where a broken veteran and an orphaned child could heal together, while honoring the memory of a soldier whose sacrifice had made their unlikely family possible. In accepting responsibility for Izzy's welfare, Erica had found her way back to the person Maria had believed her to be, the leader who never left anyone behind, the protector who measured success not by missions completed, but by people saved.